The views expressed in this podcast do not reflect those of our training institutions or the APA. The information discussed is intended for educational purposes only and should not be used for diagnosis or treatment. Enjoy! Hello everyone, thank you for joining us today. My name is Bharat Sampathi and I'm an editorial board member of the American Journal of Psychiatry Residence Journal. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Dr. Rona Hu, former medical director of the Acute Psychiatric Inpatient Unit at Stanford Hospital for 20 years, and now Associate Dean of Academic Affairs at the Stanford University School of Medicine. He's also a clinical professor of psychiatry. Dr. Hu, thank you for taking the time to speak with me today. How are you doing?
Glad to be able to speak with you today.
Thank you. Thank you for taking the time. Before we start, just a little more about Dr. Hu. Dr. Hu completed medical school and residency in psychiatry at University of California, San Francisco, and fellowships in pharmacology and schizophrenia research through the National Institute of Health. While at UCSF, she spent her time on the Asian-focused unit and Black-focused unit at the San Francisco General Hospital and was awarded the American Psychiatric Association's Minority Fellowship. She also joined the Minority National Mentors Network and lectured nationally on cultural psychiatry. And that leads us to her initiative, Stanford CHIPAO. CHIPAO stands for Communication Health Interactive for Parents of Adolescents and Others. It's essentially an initiative that targets and discusses parent-child conflict through the use of drama and theater. Dr. Hu, can you tell us what this initiative is about and why you started it?
The real catalyst was the death of several students close together in time and in space in Palo Alto. There were 4 deaths in one calendar year. At that time, all 4 of the deaths were in Asian American teenagers. Leading up to it, there had been what people called a suicide cluster starting in 2009. And I understand, Bharat, that you knew the first young man very well who died.
I did.
So in 2009, there was a death and then several others. And then in 2015, again, there was, in close proximity in time and space, several deaths. And there was a lot of national media attention on the deaths in Palo Alto. And they talked about a lot of things, some of which were probably factors, some of which were probably not factors. I think what wasn't getting addressed that struck me was how disproportionately the deaths were in Asian Americans and Asians from coming from other countries. And so I wanted to do something. And for a long time, the school had been asking me to talk with parents, and I had little workshops, little lectures. And after the 4th death in 1 year, I called together a panel very quickly. The room was overflowing with parents, mostly Asian, who were very concerned. And we asked for feedback. They said over and over, show us, don't tell us. They said, we want to communicate better with our children, but we want to know how. And I remembered some workshops back at San Francisco General led by Pablo Stewart. At that point, it wasn't about teen suicide or parenting. It was about being a better medical student and being a better doctor. And the key thing that he and his colleagues did at the time was to play every scenario twice. And the first time they would have, for example, a male patient hitting on a female medical student and her being understandably upset, and then it kind of blowing up so that everyone was upset. And then the characters stayed in character. The doctors playing the patient and the medical student stayed in character, and they said what they were feeling. And then people from the audience would suggest how to do it differently. And it was very powerful. And so another one was a doctor giving bad news to a couple and handling it, with some regrettable mistakes, and then being able to hear from the audience in a non-defensive way how to handle it differently. And it was very powerful being able to hear everyone in their roles, in their own voices. And so I remember this, and I wanted to do this going forward. Back when I was an intern at San Francisco General, we didn't call it version 1.0 and version 2.0 because that was before our digital age. But now it's very much a version 1.0, version 2.0. We want the parents to see and recognize a particular interaction. We call them vignettes. And then say, oh, I had that happen just this morning. Oh, I recognize that. And we've definitely had people come up afterward and say that's exactly what happened. And of course, we get the vignettes directly from either ourselves or we get them from real life, from people suggesting them to us and so forth. And then the version 2.0 is the way we'd like it to happen. We play the scenario over again, often with suggestions from the audience.
Mm-hmm.
And then the people in the vignette talk about how it feels different. It's like interactive role play.
Mm-hmm. So to summarize, you adapted your experience from UCSF and present a scenario of parent-child conflict in version 1.0. Then you pause and have a discussion session with parents and repeat with version 2.0, incorporating your own and parent suggestions to work through the difficult situations you're presenting.
Yeah.
Okay. So what kind of situations do you present in your skits?
Oh, we've gotten all kinds of skits. Bad grades, dating someone dating in general, but also dating someone that the parents don't approve of. The expression of emotion, so hugging, one of our popular skits is called Awkward Hug. Not being able to talk about mental health issues, things like depression, like cuttings. Am I able to give a shout out to you, Bharat?
Oh, yeah, of course.
Very popular one called Bad at Math. It's funny because before you joined CHIPAO, I had written one on exactly the same topic, but yours was much better. So yours replaced the original Bad Grades skit, but coming from real life, and we're expanding it. We'll talk a little bit later about different populations, but each community has some issues that they may not have seen addressed in any kind of format before, and especially not in this kind of format where they can sort of practice and do things differently. And so we want people to know that if they've had an issue with bad grades or with shouting or with whatever, curfew, video games, dating, that they're not a bad family or bad parents for having these things come up. And they're also not bad people for having handled it in a way the first time that they want to do differently this time. We don't want to tell them, we don't want to demonize them and say, well, just don't do that again, because that's not helpful. We want to give them options for, okay, if that didn't go the way that you wanted it to, what are some things that might work better? How would you like to do it differently? And we give them options. And we also, because we have the parents talking about what their impulse was, their first impulse was,
Mm-hmm.
we make it okay for them to have had the first impulse. It's just, do you want your reaction to be the first impulse, or do you want a different reaction?
Yeah, and I think a specific skit that comes to mind is the skit that surrounds the topic of self-harm and cutting behaviors. And I think what you're alluding to is version 1.0. The parent is very distraught, confrontational, and essentially arguing with the child, talking about, why are you cutting? This is wrong. This is unacceptable. And then version 2 talks about how you can take a very scary situation but make it more of a constructive, collaborative conversation as a parent, really understanding how to communicate and connect with your child during times, troubling times like that. I think that was a very powerful skit that unfortunately a lot of parents don't really have the experience to handle those kinds of situations.
Yeah. We got that skit, even the title of it, which is What's Wrong With You, from a very brave teenager who stood up in front of a panel of parents and said, when my mom says, I need to know if you're doing something stupid, she said, there's no way of answering that. Like the parents were saying, we're asking questions, but our kids won't talk to us. And this young woman said, I was on the verge of trying to tell my mother how much distress I was in and that I was cutting, but when she says, and it doesn't have to be cutting, it can be an eating disorder, it can be drugs, and I need to know if you're doing something stupid. There's no way of answering that.
Mm-hmm.
And say, yes, I'm stupid. And interestingly, when we did this skit in front of parents, the parents said, well, I thought you were talking about drugs and I don't approve of drugs. And I said, okay, I don't approve of cutting either, and actually probably this girl doesn't approve of cutting, but she's doing it. She doesn't want to be doing it, but it's, there's a reason why she's doing it. And so we talk about subtle differences in languages, the difference between what's wrong with you and what's wrong, sweetie, to be able to, instead of what's wrong with you, to be like, what's wrong? And and being open to listening. And then in the skit, I can't demonstrate this on the podcast, but visually, we show them that when the kid it feels attacked, so if the parent's standing over them, pointing their finger in their face, hands on the hips, attacking them in the middle of doing something, then the kid feels attacked and defensive. Whereas if the mom pulls up a chair next to the kid, in the skit we have the teen is texting and in the middle of something, and so the mom sort of pulls up a chair, instead of saying, "Put that away, we need to talk," she says, "Hi, do you have a moment?" And the mom sort of waits patiently until the teen says, "What is it?" And the mom says, "I notice you seem really down lately, and I'm kind of worried." And then she doesn't give up when the teen says, "I'm fine." And then the mom says, "Well, I just worry." And then she does it in a non-confrontational way. In version 1.0 of What's Wrong with You, the mom shoves these bloody tissues in the teen's face. And of course, that feels awful. A funny story is one of the first times I performed this, we hadn't gone through the full rehearsal before. And so she didn't know I was going to have what she thought were actually bloody tissues.
Mm-hmm.
They were food coloring. And then I shoved them in her face. And she genuinely freaked out because it was so aversive. So you can imagine that a teenager who's been cutting and has, quote, evidence shoved in her face is going to feel like a criminal.
Mm-hmm.
So we act this out for the parents, and then we break it down motion by motion. And then they can ask the mom and the teen between when we perform the vignette and then when we take questions and answers from the audience. We ask them what they've observed, and then we also have the audience ask the teen and the person playing the teen and the person playing the parent what they were thinking and so forth. And we try to be very honest with our responses. The mom can say, and I'm often the one playing the mom, and I'm the mom of a teen in real life. So, I try to be honest about my impulses. It's like, I'm a mom. It's my job. She's supposed to listen to what I say. It's like, why am I the bad guy in this? And then the moderator and the audience kind of works then the upset mom through this, or works the teen through what they can be doing differently.
Mm-hmm. I've seen this firsthand. I think the response has been very strong in terms of parents really responding to these skits. But how do you feel the response has been like since starting this initiative? Do you think it's helped to reduce the stigma surrounding mental health, particularly in Asian communities?
I really think it has. The very first performance we didn't have any publicity, so I think there were like 6 parents in the audience, and we soldiered on. We thought, okay, well, the 6 parents deserve as best of a performance as we can put on. So we went ahead, and then by the next week, we had 150 people.
Wow.
Just from word of mouth. And colleagues of mine who were on WeChat said it's been all over that. Well, we can talk about the publicity in a moment, which has been like amazing. But
Mm-hmm.
even just there in the audience, there's the reactions to us, which is nice. And then there's the reactions that they have with each other that I hear about afterwards. So with us, the young man, Jason Lee, who wrote Awkward Hug, parents come up afterwards and hug him. One of our newest skits is one called Pride. I see people in the audience crying,
Wow.
after at least one of those performers. The actor who played in the Pride skit, Edric Zhang, was saying, "I think we saved lives. I really think we did, because even if the people in the audience aren't themselves the parent of a gay teen, they're a neighbor or an aunt or someone who can be an ally for that person."
Yeah, and I think I also realized when I've been to some of the presentations that parents really start opening up together. First, it's one parent that stands up and it talks about a personal situation.
Yeah.
And then, it's kind of a snowball effect. And it's very powerful to see that, seeing parents feeding off each other in terms of understanding that it's not okay to keep mental health under the wraps, and everyone starts opening up and talking, and it becomes a very productive conversation.
They form a support group, and in so many of these communities, there's a stigma against talking about mental health. I remember talking with parents of a patient where I said, it would be very helpful if you were to join a group about this. And he said, oh no, I'm a pillar of the community. I can't admit that I have a child with mental health issues. And so when we do CHIPAO and parents get together and it's like, oh, you're having that issue too, and they feel not alone. I've run into people who have seen the vignettes, having coffee together and so forth, and they'll call me over and say, yeah, we started getting together because we have teenage sons with, the same issue and so forth. And so just even before they do anything differently, just the sense of not being alone is so important. One question that I'm often asked is why I chose the name CHIPAO, because Communication Health Interactives for Parents of Adolescents and Others. Why CHIPAO? And it was meant as a signal for the first group of parents that they wouldn't be alone. So often immigrant communities feel demonized. And if they were a minority in the audience and having people telling them, y'all should just chill out, you should just stop being that way, then that would feel very unsafe. So knowing that they would be either the majority or a substantial minority, knowing that there would be people on the panel. So CHIPAO is the name of a celebration outfit in Chinese culture. That dress with the sort of high neck that has buttons going to one shoulder. And, it's worn at weddings, it's worn at funerals, it's worn at parties. So I wanted it to be a code that if you come, you'll be welcomed. You won't be demonized. We won't tell you to stop being a tiger mother or whatever. It's sort of like you will be welcomed, and we want to problem solve with you and not just tell you what to do.
Wow, that's really fascinating. So the CHIPAO dress can be worn on many different occasions, and the symbolism here is that your dress, or you in this case, will always be welcome at these events.
Yeah.
You'll be able to watch relatable theater, and you can also speak freely about your personal parent-child conflicts without fear of being judged.
Yeah. And then there's also been often a devaluing of what are considered the humanities-based things in some of the traditional Asian cultures. And so someone asked, in what universe are Asian kids allowed to even take drama? I was like, you've got a good point. And so originally when we were starting with CHIPAO, I tried to workshop it with some of the Asian kids at the local high school who I knew. And there were some. At some point, they said, if we're acting as the teens in the skits, our parents won't open up. They won't say what they're really feeling. And so they were the ones who suggested that all of the roles be played by people in CHIPAO instead of with teens. If we do performances for the teens specifically, then we'll use teen actors. But with the parents, we wanted the parents to be able to say openly, I think my child is basically lazy, or I don't see why they can't get top of their class in everything. I did, so we want to hear those things because we can't do anything about them if we don't hear them. And we want the parents to feel safe.
So essentially, acting is done by members of the community and CHIPAO team members to make sure parents are able to share openly about their personal conflicts with children, correct?
Yeah.
And even in the audience, it's usually parents only for the same reasons.
Yeah.
Has anyone ever come up to you and said, oh, these skits aren't realistic or you're stereotyping?
Frankly, before we started, there were some people not in the community who were sort of like, is this stereotyping? Are you adding to the problem? And, we don't have professional actors. We have ourselves. We have people from within the community, and each skit is written from within the community. We want it to be true to life and not stereotyping. So none of the skits start with, I wonder if these people do this. And we edit it. Someone says, yeah, I don't see the mom really saying that, or I don't see the teen really saying that. We want to do real life.
So these skits are personal. They are situations that CHIPAO team members have actually experienced. But you also take what parents have to say into account when modifying or tinkering with the skits for future performances to make sure they're as realistic as possible.
Yeah, yeah.
I see. Yeah, that's very valuable to have mental health professionals and real parents screening the skits. So, in addition to targeting Asian communities, have there been any steps to create skits with scenarios catered to other ethnic groups like the Latino community, for example?
Yeah, so, we started with the East Asian community and very quickly we got requests to do others. You're part of the South Asian community. People pointed out that there were some things that were overlapping, like, bad at math, resonated with
Mm-hmm.
with a lot of people. And then each group had some unique issues as well. So in the South Asian community, we've recently come up with one called Marriage Material, written by Preeti Tawi. And she is an engineer who heard about CHIPAO and joined. In the Latino community, when we were doing a school that had a very large Asian population, but not a very large Latino population, we went ahead and got Spanish language translators. And this mom came up afterwards. This was a skit where the teenager is making fun of the mom's accent. But anyway, getting back to this Latina mom, she came up and she said the skit was exactly like her life, and that her son told her not to come to the PTA meetings because no one would understand her, and told her to bring pink frosted Safeway cupcakes to the bake sale instead of empanadas. And she felt so ashamed. We had some of the Latino residents do some of the skits about things like how unfair it is to have to babysit the younger kids or work in the family business, or not be able to play sports because they have to help with the family just getting by, not being able to do after school activities. And so, we wanted the parents to hear this and not demonize them, but also brainstorm with them on some possible issues. A lot of the parents, for example, from immigrant communities don't know that the school can provide interpreters. A lot of them don't know about free tutoring services, and just sort of feeling like ashamed, to go to a parent meeting dressed as they were from work and so forth like that. These are things we want to be able to address.
Yeah, and it seems like, a lot of thought goes into every skit that's done, to really make sure that they're unique or relatable to the ethnic groups that you're attempting to connect with. But that reminded me, so it's mainly composed of mental health professionals from Stanford and the Bay Area community, right? But it sounds like community members that are interested can get involved as well.
Yeah, yeah. So community members can get involved. We always want to hear about situations that have happened with you in your lives. You don't have to have had both version 1.0 and version 2.0 happen in your real life. A lot of times we're all living the version 1.0s, right? We have people in the community as actors. We have people helping with their expertise in filming and in
Mm-hmm.
we can really use help of all kinds.
Yeah, that's really wonderful to hear that people in the community can get involved in so many different ways. So that leads me to my last question on, ethnic and cultural disparities and mental illness stemming from racism, police brutality, systemic injustice, especially in light of recent events. And, we're all aware of George Floyd's murder and then the generations of racism that Black people have faced. I was looking at some studies in particular involving the Black community, and I was finding that African Americans are more prone to mental illness and suicide attempts, and Black teens are more susceptible to attempting suicide compared to white teens. It seems like racism and stigma against mental health in the Black community plays a role in these statistics. Do you see CHIPAO creating vignettes addressing the systemic racism present in America today?
Yeah, I'd love to do more. I mean, your question brings up so many thoughts in my mind. Pablo Stewart's original vision wasn't about parents and teens. It was just about better communication. And one great thing about this intervention is that it doesn't have any side effects, Being able to listen better and hear each other better doesn't really have a downside. So much of what we do as psychiatrists and as doctors, or it's like this will help you think more clearly, but you'll gain weight, right? we're often proposing and recommending things that have a serious benefit, but also serious side effects. And I see better communication as something that just doesn't really have a downside. If parents and kids are able to really understand each other, but also, members of the community with each other, gosh, we have so many directions that we're going with CHIPAO. One is we want there to be CHIPAO spin-offs. So one of the first groups to do a bunch of CHIPAO type skits, with an entirely non-CHIPAO cast, or entirely, not from Stanford, was in Oakland, Chinatown. The Korean community has a very strong church background where we want to have this available in Korean to churches. In the Latino community, in addition to CHIPAO, there's one of the Stanford residents, Ricky Lozano, got a SAMHSA grant and has been filming telenovelas called Mariposa. A couple of undergrads approached me, and they want to do a show called Seeks in the Spotlight. And then in the Black community, which is so underrepresented in mental health, stigma and trauma, George Floyd is just the most recent in a long history of systemic racism and brutality, not just by police, but by the community at large. And, I'm old enough to remember Rodney King. And one of the interesting lessons there was also that when 4 white police officers beat Rodney King, a Black man, Koreatown in LA was torched. When we're divided from one another, it's awful. So we have to be able to come together and be better people to one another and really listen, because we can't just say that hasn't happened to me, or I don't know what you're talking about, or or I didn't do it.
Absolutely.
If someone says to us, you don't understand, then you have to be able to say, I hear you, I'm listening, help me understand.
Wow. Thank you, Dr. Hu, for that wonderful response. I think this is a very pivotal time in terms of addressing equality for all. And I'm so glad that CHIPAO has been able to bring so many different cultures and ethnicities together. If anyone would like to watch the videos, please visit Stanford CHIPAO online at www.stanfordchipao.com. That's STANFORDCHIPAO.com. You can also learn a little bit about the other team members. And if you would like to contact Dr. Hu with any skit ideas or any questions, there's a contact section on the website that Dr. Hu and her team check frequently. Dr. Hu, any last thoughts before we end for today?
I'm just so grateful for the chance to be doing this and talking about this with you, and hope I gave shout outs to just some of the many people involved, but there's so many others that I wish I had time to name them all.
Well, thanks again, Dr. Hu, and thank you to everyone else for listening to this episode of the AJP Residence Journal podcast.